Under Capricorn, starring Ingrid Bergman, Joseph Cotton, Michael Wilding, Margaret Leighton.
Hope you haven't been giving too much thought to what I said about Miss Day and her ladyship in her bedroom. I'm sure it wasn't her fault. Well, she wasn't what you call responsible at the time. I know she wasn't, because she had half her clothes off and didn't seem to notice.
Welcome to a 35th episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
And we are going through the whole filmography of Alfred Hitchcock chronologically. This is a project that we started a couple of years ago, and we take it slow. We are not rushing through the filmography, but we are proceeding slowly but surely. And today I'm looking forward to a discussion of Under Capricorn, a film that Hitchcock made in 1949, which is something of a underappreciated film. A film that Hitchcock himself allegedly wasn't too crazy about, and a film that for years was pretty much unavailable because of financial and legal reasons. So its reputation, to say the least, was delayed because some people actually think that this is one of Hitchcock's greatest films. However, all of this we will discuss in a second. Today we are joined by a wonderful guest. Andrei Gorzo. Hello, Andrei.
Hello, it's great to be here with you. I'm a huge fan of your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I need to introduce Andrei because, first of all, he's a film critic. He's a film scholar. He teaches at National University of Theatre and Film in Bucharest. And I've been following his writing whenever it's available in English. I've been following it for years. Andrei has an absolutely brilliant mind and is somebody that I wish I could see more often live in person, because we actually met only once in person. That was almost 20 years ago. It's scary to think about that.
It was in Warsaw in 2006.
And in Warsaw, exactly. So I just want to say that for me, Andrei was it was a very special occasion when we met. It was a short series of Romanian films that were playing in Poland, and you were the first person that I really ever met that I could brand as part of this sort of international community of cinephiles, because I was very much closed in my small town, and I was studying in Krakow, and I never really reached out. That was pre-internet almost. It was early internet culture, and there you were, quoting Anthony Lane,
Wow.
quoting from Nobody's Perfect, making references to Billy Wilder, Ernst Lubitsch, and all those people, and you were there in person. And I have to say, it was a very, very important event in my cinephile life. So for me, it's very. I'm touched and honored that you are here today.
Same here. The experience I had when I met you in 2006 was pretty much the same, and I remember when we started matching each other quote for quote with Pauline Kael quotes, and I thought, oh God, this guy, I know he lives in Poland, but he must be living inside my head.
Yes. Yes. It was mutual. So it was always, I remember that as a very joyous experience, very, very happy, very opening. So here we are, in the middle of a post-pandemic world, in the middle of podcast culture, reconnecting. I'm very, very happy that you are our guest. I just wanted to say this.
Really great to be here. Really great to meet Sebastian and to be part of this.
I'm thrilled by this story. I couldn't imagine a better ménage à trois for today, let's say. So I'm really thrilled. It sounds great. I also, as I'm growing up, I also try to quote Anthony Lane as often as possible, so I can relate. Thank you for being with us today.
So, let's begin with Under Capricorn, which is chronologically the last film of Alfred Hitchcock that I saw, by the way. I mean, I saw all the others and then I saw this one. That may be, the way that this film is watched sometimes. I wanted to start simply by opening it to Andrei and asking you. We've been admiring your essay on Ingrid Bergman, especially in Roberto Rossellini films, that was published in Bright Light's film journal. how did you enjoy under Capricorn? And is it a good movie? Let's start with this very basic question.
Well, I also saw this late in my life, later than any other Hitchcock picture. No, later than any other Hitchcock picture of the sound era. And yeah, I postponed and postponed watching it. I was put off by its bad reputation, and particularly by the fact that, I don't know, when I was really young and impressionable, I read Pauline Kael's capsule review of it, and it's basically just a description, just 2 sentences, and she calls it a stinker. And she doesn't even add, she calls it a Hitchcock stinker, and she doesn't even add anything else except the fact that I think she says that the casting of this picture defies all imagination. And yeah, I was put off by its reputation, and I postponed watching it. And it was only when I was 30 or something, that must have been in 2008 or maybe 2009, and I was getting interested in long take aesthetics, and I was trying to look more systematically at the matter. And of course, I knew that apart from Rope, Hitchcock had this other film, which is famous for long take experimentation. And by then, of course, I also knew that the film has its defenders, beginning with Rivette and Truffaut and their Cahiers du Cinéma colleagues, who actually offered it in 1958 as one of the 12 best films of all time. It was that famously polemical list they did. Orson Welles was on it, not for Citizen Kane and not for The Magnificent Amberson. He was on that Cahiers list with Mr. Arkadin. And Hitchcock was there not with any of his official masterpieces. He was there for the reviled under Capricorn. And then, of course, I read other defenders. They are really a beguiling and dauntingly distinguished group. There's Robin Wood, there's Mark Rappaport, who are great champions of this film.
So what was it like? What was it like when you watched it? What was it like when you finally watched it?
I don't remember much the first time I watched it. After that first time in 2008 and 2009, I watched it again and again. The last time was when I was preparing for this discussion with you. What can I say? It remains a film that I prefer to think about than actually watch. I like moments from it. Some of them are like touches or grace notes. I don't know. I like the business with, we'll talk about all this, I'm sure, get into the details, with Charles's coat and the window that turns into a mirror when he shows Ingrid Bergman to herself. I like, that dissolves from the rain on the window to the lonely tear on Bergman's cheek. There's that close-up of Joseph Cotton's hands fidgeting with a necklace, which he intends to give her, and he changes his mind. I like some of the camera choreography. I especially like a moment, it's, I don't know, after 45 minutes or so, when the camera actually climbs the stairs with a staircase with Millie. I like the movement when the camera snakes around the staircase, and upstairs it goes into the bedroom, then downstairs again with Millie, and through a living room, and then into a kitchen. But yeah, after watching it several times and after listening to its champions, and I still find it, I don't know, heavy going, if not leaden or lumbering, then at least heavy going and somewhat stayed. And don't get me wrong, it's not the fact that it's not perfect. There are other Hitchcock films that I find intensely fascinating, despite the fact that I don't think they fully succeed as achieved works of art. For instance, I don't know, Marnie. I think that's an incoherent film. That's a film at war with itself. It's pulled in different directions by different impulses and intentions, and I think it breaks down from the stress of all those contradictions, but I can watch it again and again. I find it fascinating. I find it exciting. It is not really the case which this one with under Capricorn. Although I think, Mark Rappaport really makes a great case for it, and so does Robin Wood, I'm not converted.
You're not converted. Okay. What about you?
It's a great point. Yeah. I would add to the list of these aficionados of this film David Thompson, who also seems to like it a lot. But I had this feeling rewatching this film yesterday that maybe you can be in love with this film if you love the themes of Hitchcock, which are so condensed and kind of naked here. But if you don't, if you prefer what he does with them, for example, I'm not crazy about the Hitchcock's obsessions, but I'm crazy about what he does with them. But here I think you must be in this first group to really enjoy it as this condensed Hitchcock. But for me, and this is also a question I have to all of you, the wall that I'm encountering, of course, is the whole notion of 19th century melodrama. I think we've kind of mentioned that when we were discussing the early Hitchcock, silent Hitchcock, and for example, Waltzes from Vienna. I think there is this wall between our generations and that kind of aesthetic, which is really and the visual barrier. For example, when we hear that it was very expensive to make this film, and then we see that everything is painted, which is not in medium shots. The house was built, but all the rest was painted, which of course can give you this eerie, strange feeling. But for me, it's just garish, right? So I think there is this aesthetic barrier that it's very difficult for me to kind of go through. And my maybe a bit of a controversial notion. I consider Jack Cardiff a master cameraman. I love Powell and Pressburger movies and what they were doing with color photography in the 40s. But here I think this movie could be much more appealing if it were in black and white. This Gothic in black and white could be more like Gaslight, maybe. I know this movie is famous for being in color, and color plays an important role, but I just cannot cross this aesthetic barrier. So I can admire it and discuss with you and listen to Andrei's fascinating remarks, but I have a problem with this one.
Well, my turn, I guess. I don't love this film, unfortunately. I would love to, subscribe to the same club as Chabrol and the other guys. However, I simply cannot share the love. I think that it has fascinating moments, and on the basis of those moments, I would say, as scenes, as even fragments of scenes, there are some tiny pieces of it that rank up there with some of the most wonderful Hitchcock touches in Hitchcock history, I would say. And for me, one of those moments, and there are several, one of those moments is definitely the first approach of the mansion by Charles Adair, when he first approaches the mansion, which, by the way, looks otherworldly because it has this. It's painted. It's a matte painting, of course, in some of the shots, but it has this emerald quality. It's like basically like a mansion built by the Wizard of Oz. It's not a realistic depiction of a.
The name itself also is.
Yes, and the name, the name which by the way, I found somewhere the information that it's in Aboriginal language, which maybe later on we may invoke when we discuss the post-colonial element. But yes, this whole moment of approaching the mansion and of looking through the windows inside of it, it's one of those really great Hitchcock moments that I cannot compare with anything else, because it's not like Rare Window watching. Definitely, it's a different experience, because here Charles Adair is very, very close to the window frame, and it's through some magic. I think it's Jack Cardiff magic, which I cannot decipher because I'm not a DOP. The depth of field is so flat that we see the action within the mansion very close to us. So it's like basically it's not a voyeuristic figure of someone straining their eyes to see what's happening inside and barely distinguishing it. No, it's like we are getting immediate access to this intimacy of this household, which this, and it's a very troubled household. I mean, there's alcoholism, there's some sort of guilt, secrecy, mental illness, and of course violence, because one of the first things that we see is this horrific, and this is a moment I love, because I think this is a truly Hitchcockian moment of trauma, when he looks inside and he sees this violent scene in the kitchen with the women restraining her, and this is the moment, and then when he slips into the interior, it's like magic. He's already there, like he didn't even have to really traverse any obstacles. He simply injects himself into this very, very troubled household. So it's but one moment. It's just one moment that I wanted to highlight, because at moments like this, I think that the movie is truly beautiful. And however, there's all this other stuff, all this padding of very, very antiquated melodrama. I think of all the melodramatic plots that Hitchcock used, this one, I would side with Pauline here, saying that this plot is really a stinker. It's really like this, 19th century, very, very antiquated melodramatic plot. However, and I will say also this, that the mere presence of Ingrid Bergman in the context of her earlier roles for Hitchcock makes this a fascinating spectacle to me, because the first time she appears, she's so disheveled, she looks so bad, and of course deliberately so. It's like this movie ugliness, that we see, that she's lit and dressed to look really, really bad. That it's fascinating because it's contrary to everything that Hitchcock did with Bergman up till that point. He really glamorized her, even when she was so drunk in Notorious at the beginning. She was this beautiful drunk. She was radiant as a drunk, and here she's really like this sort of figure of a hag almost, and to this adds a fact that we probably will mention later, that I think this movie has terrible costumes.
Terrible costumes. Yes.
They really, there's something wrong. I'm not a historian of attire, but there's something wrong with those costumes. They sometimes look ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we may mention this in a second. So for me, it's a film of found pleasures, small found pleasures. However, there's also this very weird vibe to it that's almost like otherworldly feeling. And I mean the Shrunken Head episode, which, it's like from Val Lewton film. It's 1949, and suddenly in a Hitchcock picture, in a costume Hitchcock melodrama, think Rebecca or something like that, suddenly there's this shrunken head from cat people or something like that. What do you make of this element? Because I'm curious to hear what's your take.
Before getting to the shrunken head, I completely agree with everything you said, but about the film being out of date, out of its time, difficult to relate to for the younger generation, I wonder if it was not worse in 1949 when it came out. I wonder if it, the tropes must have looked out of date then. Very 19th century, the fallen noble woman, the doomed romance between the lady and the stable boy. Will she be restored to her former dignity? And that part about a highborn woman having to gather herself and assume the authority of a real lady of the house, which is, about not letting yourself be intimidated by servants, about learning to control your servants. And I don't know, why should a modern democratic audience care about this aspect of her?
And the look of those servants, the
caricatures of the
food scene, right? They cannot even make eggs without the supervision.
Yeah, and they look almost degenerate with alcohol and alcoholism and stuff like that. So yeah, in 1949, I suppose it must have felt very old-fashioned, and especially, compared with something like Carol Reed's The Third Man, with which it shared Joseph Cotton as a leading man. By the way, I remember that at the time, Manny Farber called Carol Reed. He said, well, in his review of The Third Man in '49, he said that Carol Reed was a former Hitchcock shadow. So he called Carol Reed a former Hitchcock shadow. And at that moment, in 1949, for a moment at least, it was Carol Reed who looked modern and Hitchcock who looked, sort of mired in the 19th century melodramatic convention. Because, The Third Man was shot on location. It was topical in its images of bombed out Vienna. It was modern. It felt modern in its sense of evil, Orson Welles trafficking diluted penicillin. It felt modern in its post-war malaise and fatigue and word weariness, and it had that adult subject matter
and the ending as well.
The unhappy ending, the feeling that this was a film at the right time and at the right place to document, what was a historical moment. It was the dawn of the post-war world, the dawn of the Cold War era, and now, of course, if you look at The Third Man, it also has its hokey, old-fashioned aspect. I refer to the fact that, the glossy, expressionistic visual treatment given to the city of Vienna by Reed and his DOP, Robert Krasker. And the atmospherics now look sort of old-fashioned and certainly less modern than what Rossellini was doing at the time with Rome and with Berlin in films like Rome, Open City, and Berlin, Year Zero. He was just plainly shooting the cities with no cosmetics. And there were actually critics who noticed that at the time. Farber, also André Bazin, who noticed that The Third Man is not really that modern. Whereas under Capricorn right now, I think its out of time quality may actually work better than it did then, because you can really watch it as a sort of fairy tale about a cursed princess, like a princess who's been put under this even spell, or maybe it works better, and you can really watch it like an out of time fairy tale. Maybe it looked worse in 1949 when certainly audiences didn't turn up for it, and critics weren't overjoyed either.
That's very interesting. Also, in terms of The Third Man winning both the Golden Palm of that year and the Best Cinematography Oscar. So I think that's absolutely true, that it must have seemed like, suddenly it was Carol Reed who was the man for the...
I'm sure it did for an hour or so. I'm sure it did for a moment.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Although the long take obsession, this is something that Hitchcock shares with these modern directors of the time, right? So this is interesting that he uses this technique or this, let's say, the premise of realist cinema as kind of elucidated by Bazin. He uses that to shoot something very, very old-fashioned, out of time, dated at the arrival, that on arrival, we could say, right? DOA. So this is also very interesting, I think, in terms of late 40s.
Yeah, it's true, and we can really get into those long takes, because I think it is my feeling that some of the long take scenes, the choreography, the camera ballet, it feels sort of modern, but in other long take scenes, it actually emphasizes the staginess, I think. But we'll have to get into more detail to.
Yes, before we do it, I will just quote briefly from David Thompson's book, Have You Seen? 1,000 films that he chose and written sometimes brilliant essays about, capsule essays. He says, this is still one of Bergman's great performances, and the long scene in which she confesses to her crime is a tour de force. And in part, that's because Hitchcock was still under the spell of the 10-minute takes pioneered in Rope. But there, the camera was burdened with the conceptual gimmick. And here is the sentence that I want to stress. Here, as if in the mood of Orpheus or Renoir, Hitchcock has actually seen the beauties in duration and moving through space. He isn't bound to the 10-minute shots, but he is prepared to let the technicolor camera, guided by Jack Cardiff, take immense winding courses that are filled with emotional energy. And of course, what's the catnip for me is the comparison with Orpheus and Renoir, because somehow I would never otherwise, put Hitchcock and Renoir in the same sentence, probably ever. But here, yes, I think there's something to it, and maybe let's focus on those long takes, because my understanding, I haven't read the Wood piece, but my understanding is that this whole long confession scene and the fact that we get it sort of straight as one long monologue, however, with quite intricate camera movements, the camera keeps moving.
Yeah, and reframings.
So for Wood, this is what makes it so distinguished, yeah?
Yeah, for Wood, I mean, I would just start with referencing one of his observations that I find very funny and great, that in his view, Bergman's Hollywood movies, they are based on this idea that these movies must destroy her smile. Her beautiful smile, and because she's a suffering character in most of them, that is the clue, the core of these movies, to destroy Bergman's smile. And in Under Capricorn, maybe she smiles at certain moment once Michael Wilding's character can get the smile back to her. But yeah, Wood, I think Wood is, as far as I remember, he is fascinated precisely by this very subtle reframings, that at one moment we have the character, we have Adar that she's confessing to, then Hitchcock makes it so abstract that we only see her face, so as he was saying to herself, or like in this abstract terms, just like confessing, like almost, and that's my association, like in a Bergman movie, right, when you have these monologues. So
like,
I think
as in Ingmar Bergman.
Ingmar Bergman, precisely. Yes, like in
the B.B. Anderson persona moment, right?
Exactly. That's kind of, I have the feeling that that's what he considers, and maybe the integrity of the performance, right? This is also something that is important for him, and I think he describes the layers of precisely these Hitchcock's themes, like guilt, confession, suffering, that are kind of encapsulated in this one sequence in its pure form. I don't know, how do you agree with that? Do you feel that as the power of this scene?
I don't know. I enjoy, as I was saying, I enjoy some of the long take scenes, but I can't really say that her long monologue, Bergman's long monologue, is my favorite of those. I suppose the long take sequences that I enjoy in Under Capricorn, I really enjoy them more on a virtuosity level. So just the technical stuff. I'm amused by, I don't know, an early scene when Charles visits his cousin, the governor, and the camera follows Charles on a corridor, and then I think through 2 different doors before revealing the governor, who amusingly is taking a bath. Then, of course, there's a very spectacularly intricately choreographed scene when the male guests, because the wives haven't turned up, arrive at Flasky's dinner, and they move from room to room with a camera gliding behind them. I really like that. And of course, I like to imagine the complicated ballet that the props themselves had to perform. The table, which probably had to be dismantled somehow to make place for the camera. So, I like to imagine the unseen choreography the walls and the props and the technicians who had to dance out of the shot, to move out of the shot constantly. It's pleasing to imagine that, and I enjoy the fluidity of all that for its own. So it's purely formalistic for its own sake. And then, as I was saying earlier, there's that shot when the camera actually climbs upstairs, climbs the staircase with Millie. And then down again it goes with Millie and that lackey with the bottles when they go and humiliate Hattie by throwing all those bottles on the kitchen table. And I like the camera move. It's one of the fanciest in the film, and I'm impressed by that. Other long take scenes in the film add, at least to my eyes, they add to the theatrical stylization, this dimension of theatrical stylization. And of course, this dimension of the film, it can certainly be defended, as bold stylization, but I don't think it really works. There's, it's a film in which really spectacular things take place in the wings. Charles living on Flasky's horse and falling, and the horse breaking its leg, and then Flasky going out into the night to shoot the horse, but we don't see him. We don't see him, just as we don't see Adair jumping on the horse and riding and falling. It all takes place in the wings. The camera stays in the house, and we become aware of the set as a set. And of course, it can be defended. This kind of blatant artificiality can be defended the way Robin Wood defended the rear projection and the painted sets with Marnie, for example. But to me, it doesn't really work. And there's a beautiful shot of there's a monologue of Millie's in which what she's doing is basically she's pouring the poison of jealousy in Flasky's ears.
It's a kind of Shakespearean moment.
It's a Iago moment. It's a Iago routine. Of course it is. And she talks all about Hattie and Charles, and the camera remains glued to her, and she remains the focus of the shot as Joseph Cotton moves around, and it feels very, very theatrical to me. Almost as if Hitchcock had trained a big light on her as she was doing her Iago routine. Joseph Cotton keeps silent. He doesn't say anything. And she's doing all those things with her eyes. She widens her eyes in that grand theatrical manner. And I think the long take staging emphasizing in that case the theatricality of the thing. And I actually like her, Margaret Leighton. I don't know. I would say that she's the only one from the four principals whom I find really entertaining in the film. She's a good, sexy, witchy, stagey villainess, as well as a descendant of Mrs. Danvers. But I like her. I like the arched eyebrows and the insolent, sexy lips, and I like what she's doing. But that's a very stagey moment when she's doing her Iago routine in long take, as Joseph Cotton is moving sullenly around her. As for Bergman's great monologue, well, I don't know. I'm split on this. I mean, I agree with Thompson and Robin Wood that it is an important Ingrid Bergman role because it really allows her to play all the different sides of her persona at the same time. And Robin Wood wrote beautifully about that. We have the sinner, the dissolute, lost woman, prey to what she calls, what she euphemizes as my weakness. We have the natural woman who defies conventions and goes barefooted to fancy dinners. We have the woman radiantly in love, lyrically in love, the woman whose face lightens up as she talks about, as she remembers past loves. We have the martyr saint, the martyred woman. We have the mad woman or the sick woman, you know, people forever trying to put her in institutions, etc., etc. We have the lady, the great lady. So we have all these aspects of the Bergman personas, and of course, some of her best roles are about the play of these contradictory aspects. And here, yeah, you see them, you see them all. But I don't know. I prefer to think about this as a great Ingrid Bergman role than I actually like to watch her in it. I like moments. I like her entrance, of course. It's carefully prepared. It takes place after 25 minutes. You know, the camera move that reveals her, starting with her bare feet. And then we see her whole, and yeah, she looks disheveled. She looks almost hag-like, as you were saying. Yeah,
it's fascinating because I still need to read the Robin Wood essay. I still haven't read it, but I find it very difficult of thinking of this monologue as the great monologue of Ingrid Bergman's career, because it doesn't have the force for me that the really great screen monologues have. I'm not even saying about something like Bibi Andersson in Persona, because that's, you know, there's the element of stripping away a taboo, which here, of course, couldn't be achieved, right, because of constraints. But even though, I mean, she, you know, it's you mentioned one great coincidence, which is the coincidence with The Third Man, that you know, those films sort of were on the same time plane. But I would mention another, is that, you know, at that time when that movie was playing, Jessica Tandy was already ripping apart the New York stage in Streetcar Named Desire. And two years later, of course, Vivien Leigh will follow. And Blanche Dubois is not that different from Henrietta. She's from the landed gentry. She fell from grace. She's a mad woman, as you said, who followed her heart. Well, she didn't seduce her pupil, her student, but still she seduced the stable boy. And I would say that she would be absolutely at home at Tennessee Williams' universe. Night of Iguana, Suddenly Last Summer. In Suddenly Last Summer we have this 16 minutes monologue of Elizabeth Taylor, where we learn about the cannibalism that happened. Anyhow, here having that in mind, but not purely as an intellectual exercise, but I think there was something in the culture at the end of the 40s, at the beginning of the 50s, this opening to excess, female excess also, through melodramatics. And just think, and here it doesn't happen. I think here it doesn't happen. I think here it's primed to happen, but I think that it doesn't by some bad luck, or maybe it was a curse actually that Hitchcock decided upon those blasted 10-minute takes, because I actually feel that they take away some force. They don't put in force, they take away some force from the performance. Maybe it's the stress of the actors who needed to hit the marks and navigate all this moving furniture that may also add to it. But here, just imagine what would Douglas Sirk do with this material. He would write it on the wind. Yeah, he would. Exactly. I mean, it's just a couple of years, because it's not that moment yet, but a couple of years later he would take a piece of trash like this, and he would infuse it with really powerful sexual confusion, like the Dorothy Malone character in We're Written on the Wind. So here I feel like Hitchcock is, on one hand, he's flexing his muscle and saying, yes, I will present this in a way that's unique. The intricate movements of the camera and 10-minute takes. But on the other hand, I think it doesn't deliver. That there's no force. When Bergman says her monologue, and she says about not hot mess, but the hot savagery or something like that, kids were eating stuff from the gutter, and there were those men. Is she implying that she was prostituting herself to that?
That's how Robin Wood. I think.
I mean, what exactly happened there?
And there is a moment when Cotton calls her trash, which is one of my favorite moments.
And this is something I don't see in this character as she is played by Bergman. I cannot imagine that she abandoned herself to this, sort of lechery, in the past, that she debased herself by having sex with all those convicts. I just don't feel this in this character. I don't think it's there. And the other thing is, which I guess none of us is really qualified to discuss, is her Irishness, because to my ear, I mean, there's not a trace of Irish anything about Ingrid Bergman. They keep saying all those names, Killamora or stuff like that, but it's not. I mean, the Irish, the music of Irish language is not entering her speech at any point. But I'm not qualified enough.
No, but that was the real problem when they were shooting. There's even this anecdote, right, that Joseph Cotton he just couldn't say I was born in Ireland. So James Birdie told him, well, just say you were born in Virginia as you were. That's fine. So but I mean, if I may add to what you said, maybe it's a bit trivial, but I think you feel in almost every scene, you mentioned that the experience of watching this film is quite heavy, there's this heaviness, and I think you just feel that it was a cursed production. You feel that nobody was enjoying him or herself, maybe except for Michael Wilding as Charles Adar, he makes you mentioned that the Millie is I agree that she's an entertaining character. I think Charles Adar was entertaining for himself in that movie, but otherwise they were all suffering. There were real quarrels between Hitchcock and Bergman. Cotton was really fed up with this film and made some jokes on the set. And of course, you may dismiss that and still claim that what we get by way of miracle is a masterpiece. But on the other hand, no, I feel that they were suffering, that the crew was annoyed with Hitchcock, and maybe for a good reason. They were thinking, why cannot he just cut in this one? Why does he stuff like that?
So it felt like a constraint.
Yes, when you compare the story behind this movie with the story behind Rope, which is a totally different story. It's a story, yes, there were constraints, there were long takes, but it was all well prepared, and we had fun, conveying this coded homosexual messages. We had fun with this lunch, with this feast, with a corpse in a casket. Humor. Yeah, with black humor. They kind of had fun. There are no stories about Rope that they were suffering on the set. And I think you just you feel that in this film, that there are so many wrong things that it wasn't turned into a miracle for a viewer.
Even Robin Wood, who is a great champion under Capricorn, and even he finds the casting somewhat problematic. And interestingly, he has no problem with the ethnic part, with the ethnicity, with the fakeness or the non-existence of the Irishness of the three principles. But he has a problem with the class thing, because what Robin Wood says is that it's potentially a very interesting film about class. He says that the issue of class is central here, as it won't be again in Hitchcock, Robin Wood adds, until Frenzy, I think. But then he admits that as the great champion of the film that he is, he admits that the casting muddles the issue somehow, the issue of class. The class differences get blurred, and he means that Joseph Cotton doesn't sound like he's from the other side of the class divide from Ingrid Bergman. Never mind that he doesn't sound Irish. He doesn't sound like he's from the other side of the class divide from her, and I think the film loses here. I'm not sure this aspect can really be defended. And Joseph Cotton is not very good here in general. I mean, his snarling is not very interesting here. It has little variety. I love Cotton, and I especially love him in The Third Man. I love him when he's ineffectual and sort of impotent and melancholy. But here he's just, to my eyes at least, sullen and heavy with, he keeps pulling down the corners of his mouth. And he honestly becomes a bore to me. And I was not surprised to learn that he was unhappy on the set. I actually had a good laugh when I read, I think it's in the Patrick McGilligan book, that he called the film On the Corny Crap. And Hitchcock heard him.
Yeah, and never invited him for another movie.
Even though he was Uncle Charlie.
I thought it was funny on the corner.
It's great.
It's great. And also, I would say, because you mentioned class, so I just want to comment on this. I think that, the whole setting in Australia is interesting, probably with, again, some implications that we may not grasp. David Thompson says that it should have been made in Australia because the light is different, and who knows what this film would be with the real Australian sun, blazing. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But the class thing, I think that it's fascinating because what's happening in this in terms of class in this film is exactly what Andrei said before. Is that this lady of the house, she doesn't have any power, so the portrayal of those scullery maids or those servants. It's for me it's jarringly, maybe not wrong. It's not wrong, but it's so heavy-handed, coming from a director who was definitely from working class background. That was always a theme that Hitchcock was mocking the higher classes usually, by showing some pretentiousness and stuff. And here, he fiercely humiliates those poor women who are working in the kitchen, and they look worse than Australian convicts. They look like they escaped from Deliverance or Straw Dogs, something like they could hand food to those guys in Deliverance, and the moment when Ingrid Bergman goes to the kitchen and she proposes. She basically wants to improvise this meritocracy, let's make eggs and bacon and see who's best. And this next shot, those runny eggs, they cannot even fry an egg.
Bizarre.
It's just, I just don't know how to read it, except that it's some from strange corner of Hitchcock's mind. Those. It's like witches from Macbeth. They could brew.
Yeah.
The cauldron.
Maybe it's the powerful director suggesting that without the leader in the kitchen, you won't achieve anything.
They are the metaphor. They are the metaphor for unwieldy film crews.
Yes, exactly. For these grips who didn't want to obey on the set of Under Capricorn.
And Robin Wood, of course, doesn't mention that when he talks about the class aspect of Under Capricorn. He doesn't mention the way those servants or scullery maids are portrayed. What he talks about, it's what's in the foreground. Millie, who's of the same class as Samson, as the Joseph Cotton character, would do anything to separate him from his highborn wife. Whereas Charles, who is an aristocrat like Hattie, tries to lure her away from the lowborn Flusky. And of course, the film ends with an affirmation of the married bond, of the married couple, which of course looks like an affirmation of the possibility of healing or bridging the class divide, because they don't split up, they don't go to their own people, they remain together, they reject the temptation coming from their own class. Samson rejects Millie, and Hattie rejects the snobbish Charles, and they remain together. And of course, this looks like an optimistic statement about the possibility. It's an affirmation of the married couple, but it's also an affirmation, if you want to look at it this way, an affirmation of the possibility of healing or bridging the class divide.
Oh, that's
And that's what
under the waving British flag.
Exactly.
No less.
Under the waving British flag.
Yes, in the colonies. I guess for Hitchcock, maybe this whole notion, I mean, that's taking it too far, but Australia as the place where convicts go, and nobody asks about your past. That's interesting, because like here at least, like what happens in Vegas stay in Vegas. Like in Australia, you cannot ask about people's past.
I think it is really relevant. Maybe it's one of the few ways in which the Australian setting counts, in which it plays, because Australia is non-England. Australia is not such a stuffy class society as England is. Of course, they have their own involuntary parody of it. They have their own high society, and they are mimicking, they are parroting English snobbery, but it's not as suffocating, and that's why in Australia, Hattie and Samson, they really have a chance.
I totally agree with what you said about the timelessness of the movie, right? We've discussed that, but also I keep thinking that in 2 years earlier, India gained independence. So, this movie was made in the wake of these changes. And of course, Hitchcock looks like he doesn't care. It's like, I have this feeling that in this film, the colony as an enterprise is totally naturalized. It's just the way the world works. We just set up this colony in Australia. But then I think it's precisely the moment, this movie appears precisely in the moment when the British Empire is really dissolving, like post World War II dissolving. So I think it adds something to this context.
Speaking of real world seeping into the film, let's not forget that for the public, Ingrid Bergman at the time was somebody marked. She was a marked woman, by her affair with Rossellini, and I think that there was a little bit of voyeurism, when she appears at the beginning, looking horrible, basically, and those women who are shunning her. It's not the men. The men show up for dinner. It's the women who are shunning her because they are not showing up. They're showing their disdain for her, and I think this is a disdain that real Ingrid Bergman was feeling from American women at that time, because she was being held as this image of a Jezebel, basically, like a sinner. So I think that when we see her, in this disheveled state, like in turmoil, I don't know, maybe some moralistic, puritanical women in America were looking at this and, saying like, serves you right, like you deserve to suffer. I don't know.
When did the scandal erupt?
I think it was exactly that time, right? It was exactly
after the filming, but before the release of the film.
That's possible. Yeah,
okay,
I think after the filming, because I think she was corresponding with Rossellini at the time of the filming, just trying to. But I'm not 100%
we need
sure.
to check those dates, but.
But yeah, I think it played a part in the reception of the film.
But I think also let us have like this 2 minutes of the gossip, because of course Patrick McGilligan famously kind of found this maybe the sole love affair of Alma, right, which is going on precisely at the time of the filming, and it seems to be a pretty convincing let's say theory. We still, of course, we don't know, but we have the diaries of the screenwriter that she supposedly had this affair, and of course, this affair precisely mirrors the Under Capricorn as a story, right? Because we have this unsuspecting husband who doesn't really. I mean, it takes him a lot of time. Joseph Cotten, I think he stays a cipher until the end, which is one of the problems. We don't really know what's he's thinking, and it tells him a lot of time to realize that maybe there is some amorous tension between them. So on the one hand, it is a Iago moment when Millie is pouring this notions of jealousy, but at the same time she's kind of right. So I think it's just a piece of gossip, but I think it's interesting to mention that.
I think it's relevant. I wanted to go back to the shrunken head because it doesn't sort of it's such a jarring, strange image in this, in this world of melodrama. And of course, I'm sure somebody made this comparison. I know that there was this huge symposium on under Capricorn a couple of years ago. I didn't read the papers, but the shrunken head looks like Mother from Psycho. Basically, I mean, it does look like this head of the mother that's hidden in the garage, and the household of Joseph Cotton and Ingrid Bergman in Under Capricorn is also founded on the same sort of repressed murder, because we know that Norman Bates killed the mother's lover, right, and they live in this sort of toxic atmosphere of this mansion, and here Ingrid Bergman and Joseph Cotton have this shared secret. They know that it was actually her who killed her brother, and this shrunken head appears, and actually Millie uses it to scare Henrietta. But I just wanted to add, like, is it simply a horror prop in a melodramatic world? Or is it Hitchcock toying with new ways of scaring people? Like, how did you react to this pretty graphic and, let's say, pretty fake, pretty fake shrunken head?
I can start by saying that it's pretty much, I think, the only suggestion of indigenous Aboriginal culture that we find in the film. The shrunken head. And of course, you can say it's just a grand guignol, a horror effect, but you can also say that, I don't know, I suppose it can be read as a symbol of colonial guilt if you stretch the things a bit. If you stretch them even further, I think you can even play a bit with the fact that, why not? It is Millie, who's an English woman, who's tormenting Hattie, who's an Irish woman, with it, and you can play on the colonial relation between England and Ireland. But yeah, it's you mentioned that big symposium on Under Capricorn, and it contains a very interesting paper by Stephen Morgan, who's a scholar of cinematic representations of Australia, and he tries to dig deeper in the representation of Australia, or the absence of a representation of Australia in Under Capricorn, and he has some interesting things to say about that. He mentions the fact that at the time there were some British films which were actually filmed there, which were set in Australia, and they were actually going there and filming them there. There's an Ealing Studios production called The Overlanders, which is actually using the landscape, and you mentioned the light, or David Thompson mentioned the light, and all these things that don't play any role in Hitchcock's films because it's a studio-bound affair.
By the way, this is the tie-in edition of the novel, which I still haven't read, unfortunately, but it's actually a tie-in with the movie. They say that this is supposedly the likeness of Ingrid Bergman and Joseph Cotton. I mean, of Michael Wilding, but just as a piece of maybe one day I will read it.
There's really little context for that shrunken head. Maybe too little context. It doesn't give you a lot to work for I don't know, if you're attempting post-colonial reading.
I would say there's one more aspect where we could try to locate it from contemporary perspective, because as I mentioned, India was colonialism, Australia was settler colonialism, right? There's this difference that some scholars point out to, and from that perspective, think about it, that the plot actually, if there is any, plot, except for the melodrama. The plot is about the land, right? Joseph Cotton character wants to buy more land than it is legal to do, right? And all of that. So when you connect that with the indigenously named mansion and the colonial guild, you can somehow advocate that this plot could be about many other things, about I don't know, just making money in some other ways, but we see Cotton character as obsessed with land, with taking the land. And of course we know who from this land was taken. And of course, as far as I think McGilligan mentions that there is a subplot in the book in which Michael Wilding goes out into the outback, I think.
In the book, there is that subplot, but there are various allusions to the presence of the indigenous people, although it's still marginal, very marginal, but there's more than in the film.
And the book actually begins by invocation of Capricorn as a zodiac sign, which I guess is not mentioned in the film. Like, what does it mean to be born under Capricorn? And it's I'll just quote that Capricorn supposedly, according to this quote, it denieth honor to persons of quality and esteem to the vulgar. So I guess it's, if you are born under Capricorn, then even though you are a person of quality, you won't experience the honor that goes with that. So it's an unlucky sign to be, I mean, at least according to this, it's an unlucky sign to be born under, which plays to this class, reversal, I guess.
Let's talk about. I wanted to hear you talk about the costumes.
Oh,
okay.
Ingrid Bergman with a flower in her head and this very childish dresses she wears throughout the movie.
I wish I had the vocabulary even to describe it, but there is something that they don't flatter, the figure of the actors or the actresses. It's like the actors are. It's like I can only say by comparison. It looks like a Peter Greenaway film in which people are forced into the costumes. Like they don't complement their figures. It's like Ingrid Bergman is squeezed into this very ungainly costume, and she wears this bonnet, for example, the pink bonnet at one point, which makes her look like a small girl. Those white frills, the dress that she has. I mean, it doesn't look. If you compare it even with, I don't know, Rebecca or other costume films made by Hitchcock, I guess Jamaica Inn. There's something heavy-handed, something unbeautiful about the ways that those costumes look, and sometimes they are very garish. For example, I will be mean, and the scene with Joseph Cotton and this when he's handling he's fondling the necklace, and he's talking, maybe some rubies will adorn you, and we know that he wants to present this gift, and this whole scene is about Henrietta and Charles having this affinity of taste. They know that it's too much, it's too much. It would spoil the elegant effect. But then you see the dress, then you see the dress, and there's nothing subdued about the dress. It's actually already pretty garish and too full of everything. So I am siding with Sam. I would say the rubies would not spoil the dress. They would definitely, like, he simply responded to what he saw, and he wanted to add an element. So especially after Notorious, in which Ingrid Bergman looked wonderful. She this elegant black dress that she's wearing at the party when she's handling the key in her hand. I mean, she's a knockout. And here, I don't know, like, maybe you have some.
That's what I meant when I said that color kind of gets in your way. I think it would be more bearable in black and white.
What about Michael Wilding's costumes? Because he's supposed to be this dandified, foppish figure. He's supposed to be a flashy dresser.
It may work at the beginning because he's definitely flashier than the other gentlemen who arrive at the party. although that green also takes me to to the Wizard of Oz. Let's say it's a Technicolor movie. Let's not forget. But I have a provocative question. Now I thought of it. Do you think, and this is a question for both of you, and you have to be honest, do you think that this movie, with this screenplay, this material, this cast, would have benefited from David Selznick producing it? like maybe he was needed on the set saying, Ingrid looks terrible.
No, I absolutely. I when I was watching this film, I was thinking about Gone with the Wind almost all the time because of Millie, who for me looks like a Vivien Leigh lookalike. Let's say lower class Vivien Leigh. I almost thought that I almost for a moment thought that maybe that's her.
And Scarlett O'Hara is of course Irish.
So yeah. I think absolutely, yeah. That's a great.
What
great
about
point.
what about Andrei? Would you hand this film to Selznick as a producer?
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
You don't want to appear anti-Hitchcock in our podcast, right?
I don't want to appear as an anti-authorist, and that's basically how it would sound like. But you certainly made a very eloquent argument that at least the costumes, at least the dresses worn by Bergman would have benefited from the kind of attention that Selznick used to lavish on stuff like that.
Roger Force was the name of the costume designer of this movie, and I will quickly Google and see what else did he do, just out of curiosity, and maybe you have some closing remarks.
Hopefully his family won't sue us. Yeah, and I think another Selznick touch that this film is missing, and of course, as you mentioned, we can totally defend this artificiality, which is like late Alain René, right? When it just doesn't matter if the big. But I think several sunsets and several vistas would really benefit this film also.
So Richard First was a very distinguished costume designer. The same year he actually did costumes and art direction for Hamlet, the Laurence Olivier Hamlet. So maybe he was focused on that so much that he maybe didn't do such a good job here. But he did design a lot of very distinguished films.
Not this one, maybe.
not this one.
I think it was a fantastic conversation. I don't have any more points to.
Well, me too. I enjoyed it, and maybe one more question, Andrei. What's your favorite Hitchcock film? Because I don't know. Do you have a clear-cut favorite?
Well, it tends to change. Let me think. Okay, it used to be Vertigo. It used to be notorious for. By the way, your episode on Notorious was particularly great.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really fascinated by Marnie, and I keep returning to it. Although, unlike Robin Wood, I don't think it's a coherent. I don't think it makes sense in a coherent. It's a very split film to me. But I find it absolutely fascinating. The Wrong Man is one of my favorites.
I haven't seen that in a while. I need to. I mean, we are proceeding towards it, so maybe this will be a good opportunity to reunite. Who knows?
Oh yeah.
Who knows? So, Andrei, it was wonderful. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
It was really great. It was.
So hopefully this is not the last time.
Yeah.
Well, I'd really love to do this again with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I think Wrong Man will be the right occasion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm up for anyone, any of them.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you
so much. Again, have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for being our guest. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great. Bye.
Bye.
It was wonderful to reconnect with Andrei after many years. For me, how was it for you?
Oh, fantastic. I could talk with him for hours. Yeah.
Wonderful guest. I'm very happy, and hopefully this episode made you appreciate Under Capricorn more or in new ways, it's certainly a fascinating film. I have to say, it's different, it's odd, it's not fully successful, but it's very interesting. So thank you so much for listening. This has been the 35th episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock, and please follow us on Facebook. Please rate us on iTunes. We are so happy every time that we get new listeners.
And message us if you like the podcast through Facebook or email. We'll be happy to respond.
And next time we will
discuss
Stage Fright, yes, which is another interesting film, and a film in which theatrics are very important, so we definitely will mention Hitchcock's love of theater. So thank you so much for listening. This was Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.